Connecticut's governor calls for a moment of silence exactly 1 week after the deadly shooting at an elementary school. Daniel Malloy asked that today at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time, churches ring their bells 26 times to honor each of the victims.
Vice President Joe Biden pledges to take a comprehensive look at ways to prevent gun attacks like that school massacre in Connecticut. Biden is heading a task force on gun violence in the wake of those shootings.
And Senator John Kerry urges Congress to increase funding for security at diplomatic missions. This after a damaging report on the State Department's lack of security at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. All these stories and more next on Ebru Today. Welcome to Ebru Today. We bring the world to your world. I'm Mia Toski.
And I'm Brian Jenkins. We thank you for joining us on this Friday, December 21st. Lots to talk about. Of course, we're still in the aftermath of that massacre in Connecticut. Speaking of which, Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy asked Americans to observe a moment of silence at 9:30 a.m. this morning Eastern Standard Time in memory of the 26 victims of last week's school shooting massacre.
Ebru Today's Sherry Richardson is live in our New York City bureau with the latest. Good morning, Sherry.
Good morning, Mia. Places of worship and buildings with bells are being asked to ring them 26 times for the 20 children and 6 adults killed at the school. Meanwhile, it was another sad day yesterday as more funerals were held for the victims. Funeral processions rolled through Connecticut as residents continued trying to make sense of the massacre of 20 young children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School less than 2 weeks before Christmas. Mourners overlapped at back-to-back funerals, which started Monday and will continue all week. People gathered yesterday to pay their respects to Catherine Hubbard, Benjamin Wheeler, Jesse Lewis, and Allison Wyatt, all 6 years old, and 7-year-old Grace McDonald.
Today's just another sad day in the state of Connecticut. One more of the 27 funerals that are occurring. And ever since Friday morning, we haven't had to look too far to find sadness, and we're finding sadness again today.
A service was held in New York for 52-year-old Anne Marie Murphy, a teacher who authorities believe helped shield some of her students from the gunfire. A private funeral was held in New Hampshire for Nancy Lanza, the mother of the gunman. Police say she was the first person the gunman killed last Friday. She was shot in the head 4 times while she lay in bed. About 25 family members attended the ceremony. Most students in Newtown went back to school on Tuesday, except those from Sandy Hook Elementary, where the massacre took place. Students at Sandy Hook, which serves kindergarten through 4th grade, will resume classes in the neighboring community of Monroe in January. Volunteers and town officials have been making the Chalk Hill School safe and suitable for them, working to replicate their original environment as much as possible.
It's going to be as close as possible, right down to the rooms being next to each other. Kindergarten will be with kindergarten, 1st grade will be with 1st grade, exactly the way, obviously with different hallways and all. But once they get into their classroom, it's going to look as close to their old classroom as possible.
Chalk Hill School will officially be renamed Sandy Hook Elementary School. Governors in at least 28 states have issued calls to participate in this morning's moment of silence, and a White House spokesperson said that President Barack Obama will take part as well. Reporting live from New York City, I'm Sherry Richardson. Now back to you.
Well, Sherry, obviously this is an ongoing investigation, but has there been a motive determined for the shooting rampage yet?
Mia, no motive has been released, and in fact, investigators have not found any letters or diaries that could explain the attack. Mia?
Okay, we'll be watching. Thanks so much, Sherry.
Well, gun advocates plan to speak out today, exactly 1 week after that deadly shooting in Newtown. Members of the National Rifle Association, or the NRA, have said little about this tragedy. However, that will change today when they hold an official press conference. Our Washington-based correspondent Robin Hamilton has more on that. Robin?
Brian, the NRA is this country's largest gun rights group, and in the past they've been very successful in preventing laws that put a lot of bans on weapons. But now that's all going to change probably as they're facing a lot of pressure from the public and leaders on Capitol Hill. The use and availability of weapons in this country is now under a harsh spotlight after the deaths of 27 people in Newtown, Connecticut. Exactly 1 week after the 20-year-old gunman shot his own mother with her arsenal of weapons, then killed 20 children and several teachers and administrators at Sandy Hook Elementary. The National Rifle Association will speak at a press conference today. While the country's largest gun rights group has been mostly silent this week, lawmakers have revisited the debate about gun control laws. Vice President Joe Biden, who was appointed by President Obama to lead the White House policy on gun control, says there will be changes.
The president is absolutely committed to keeping his promise that we will act, and we will act in a way that is designed, even if, as he says, we could only save one life. We have to take action.
However, that is what worries gun advocates who say laws banning certain weapons is an infringement on their rights.
Firearms are not the problem, the person is the problem. Blaming an inanimate object does nothing. A gun in and of itself is not evil.
This morning, it's important to note that the president posted a video on the White House website where he said, "We hear you," and he's referring to the petition where thousands of people across the country have signed up that petition asking for tougher gun laws. He said he is now working with Congress to create laws, pass legislation that everyone in this country can be happy with. Now, that being said, earlier in the week, the NRA had issued a terse statement saying they are looking forward to having a important dialogue with leaders in terms of finding a solution to prevent this from ever happening again. Brian?
Well, Robin, was there any indication what their solution might be?
Well, that's a great question. No, and that is why the NRA has come under even greater scrutiny, because a lot of people said they took down their social media pages, they weren't specific in the press release, and that was really a missed opportunity. So hopefully there may be some more details that will come to light at today's press conference.
All right, the nation certainly will be waiting to see what they say. Thanks, Robin.
The man who could well be the next Secretary of State is urging Congress to fund more security at diplomatic missions. Senator John Kerry's call follows a scathing report on the deadly Benghazi attack on September the 11th.
Faster results.
Lawmakers are backing pleas for better funding to protect diplomats in an uncertain world. Senators are probing the best way forward after a damning report on the 9/11 assault on the U.S. mission in Benghazi. The State Department's management has been blamed for the grossly inadequate security at the consulate.
There were clear warning signs that the security situation in Libya had deteriorated. And going forward, it is important, and I think it's important for all of us to think in terms of going forward, that we need to do a better job of ensuring a free and open dialogue among ambassadors, their embassy security personnel, and officials in Washington.
The Accountability Review Board report calls for $2.3 billion in extra funding over the next 10 years. The money will fortify and improve some of America's 275 diplomatic outposts around the world.
It is up to the President, the State Department, and the Congress to ensure that our diplomats have enough support and security to do their jobs as safely as possible. And just as we give our men and women in uniform the weapons they need to carry out their mission, we must make sure our diplomats have all the tools that they need, which include a safe place to work. Embassies are both outposts of the United States government and symbols of our country, and as such, they've been prime targets for terrorists.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was due to address the hearings, but has been ordered to rest after she suffered a concussion as a result of a fall.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's hope she recovers quickly. Meantime, after 6 months in refuge, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange emerges from the Ecuadorian embassy in London to give a public address. Aaron Aid is here with us to bring us more on that ever more bizarre story.
Always, you can count on that with Julian Assange, guys. You definitely can. So in a speech from an embassy balcony, Assange boldly announced that the files WikiLeaks intends to publish in 2013 would affect every country in the world.
Good evening, London.
Addressing the crowds on a cold and wet London evening, Assange told his supporters and the media that his whistleblowing website will release 1 million more documents in 2013. A crowd of some 80 supporters gathered outside the building in Knightsbridge to listen to the 41-year-old Australian, whose website published a mass of leaked cables embarrassing a number of countries.
Next year will be equally busy. WikiLeaks has already over 1 million documents being prepared to be released. Documents that affect every country in the world. Every country in this world.
The biggest cheers came when he praised the jailed U.S. soldier Bradley Manning and the alleged source of WikiLeaks' most embarrassing revelation.
Bradley Manning, who turned 25 this week. A young man who has maintained his dignity after spending more than 10% of his life in jail without trial, some of that time in a cage, naked and without his glasses.
He gave no hint that he would end the standoff, saying he was hauled up in the Ecuadorian embassy for fear of the U.S. investigation into his activities.
But why this immoral investigation continues and why the Australian government will not defend the journalism and publishing of WikiLeaks, I must remain here.
Assange looked healthy despite half a year spent trapped inside the small apartment he shares with Ecuador's diplomatic staff.
The UN Security Council authorizes military action to wrest northern Mali from control of al-Qaeda-linked extremists. That resolution, adopted unanimously by the UN's most powerful body, authorized an African-led force to support Malian authorities in recovering the north. The UN set no timeline for military action, but it did impose benchmarks to be met before any offensive action begins, beginning with political reconciliation on a constitution, establishing plans for free elections, and a time frame for training African troops and police. Now, the Council stressed that there must be a two-track plan, political and military, to reunify the African country. Mali has been in turmoil since a coup in March, which came to a head last month when coup members arrested the country's prime minister, a move condemned by the UN.
Meantime, more protests are expected in Egypt today that could further fuel tensions there. There have been violent confrontations between rival factions over a new constitution that will undoubtedly shape the most populous Arab nation's political future.
We are now talking about democracy, and this is a role of democracy. And we expect the results to reach something like 60%. So if you see 60% of the population are pro something, you have to follow them.
We are concerned about the freedoms and the rights of all Egyptians, be they women, children, youth, or adult men, Nubians, Bedouins from Sinai, Muslims, Christians. This constitution does not protect the rights of all Egyptians.
The first day of voting on December 15th resulted in a 57% majority in favor of the Constitution. The second stage on Saturday is expected to produce another yes vote as it covers regions seen as more conservative and likely to back Morsi. Morsi and his backers say the Constitution is needed to seal a transition from decades of military-backed rule, but opponents say it ignores the rights of women and minorities. The second round of voting is set for Saturday. The referendum is being held over 2 days because many of the judges needed to oversee polling stayed away in protest. Now, in order to pass, the Constitution must be approved by more than 50% of the voters. Meantime, tanks continue to guard the presidential palace in anticipation of tomorrow's voting. Now for a look at today's newspapers and more news from overseas, Brian is over at Live Touch with a look at what the foreign press is covering for your Friday. Brian.
Well, Mia, we'll start you off at Down Under, as they say. The Australian Chinese military power shifting the Pacific balance. A Chinese white paper warns, the Australian white paper warns that China's advances in military technology and its naval fleet expansion, you see that there, is challenging Australia's strategic weight in the region and putting Australia at risk of attack without warning. That paper urges Australian authorities to increase defense spending and modernize their own forces. Meantime, in the China Daily, some peaceful prospects there. China and the U.S. agreeing on major trade measures. During talks in Washington, officials from both countries found common ground on key issues, among them fairer treatment for Chinese investors by the U.S., and stronger protection of U.S. intellectual property by the Chinese. One Chinese official summed up the talk saying neither the Chinese nor the U.S. economies can thrive